Okay, so just to run through some of the topics that have come up this week, Baruch Hashem, we all saw that the hostage, the first Shiloh was, with the hostage, Uri, I think Magadish was her name, so she was released, Baruch Hashem, from captivity, and it should keep happening, keep happening. So someone asked me, is there a proper bracha to say when someone is released? Because they heard someone say Matir Asurim. So the truth is no, the bracha of Matir Asurim is not said on the release of a hostage. I don't think there is any bracha being said. The only bracha I could conceptually think about is like this. The Shulchan Aruch writes that if you haven't seen your friend in 30 days, you say the bracha of Shechianu. And if you haven't seen them for a year, you say the bracha of Mechayim Esim. Now, it's understood that nowadays we don't say this bracha anymore. Rav Shlomo Zalman, Halachos Shlomo talks about this, and there's basically two reasons amongst the poskim why we don't say the bracha anymore. First of all, when they used to, in the times before cell phones, when they didn't see people for 30 days, and it was war-torn areas, they legitimately didn't know if they were alive. So when they saw the person, they said, "Wow, Baruch Hashem Shechianu." And after a year, it's Mechayim Esim. Nowadays, you know where people are, you know what's going on. Therefore, there's not as much of a requirement. Secondly, also nowadays, it used to be that people were a little more honest, and if they didn't like you, they wouldn't say the Shechianu, and if they said Shechianu, I mean, they really cared about you. Nowadays, people are a little more politically correct. Everyone would just say the bracha on everybody. But I will say this, if you were to see someone, Bez Hashem, when the soldiers come home, and they haven't spoken to them in 30 days, if that's the case, and they see them, I don't think there's bracha over the telephone, there's no bracha over television, but if you see him, you'd say a bracha Shechianu. So I think if you were to see a hostage, it's like as a shita when you have a baby boy, you say the bracha Hatov HaMeitiv. Hatov HaMeitiv and Shechianu are very similar. It's just Hatov HaMeitiv is where the pleasure is being felt by multiple people. So when a father and mother have a baby boy, they say Hatov HaMeitiv. The father says Hatov HaMeitiv. Now the question is, do you make a bracha on a baby girl? So technically in the Shulchan Aruch there is no bracha, but Rav Shlomo Zalman said you could say Shechianu when you see her for the first time. If you say a Shechianu when you haven't seen a friend for 30 days, seeing your baby girl for the first time is definitely included in that. So I think if you were to see the hostage in real life and you'd maybe have a relationship with this person and you'd feel close to them, I would think making the bracha of Shechianu would make sense. Over the television, we don't make brachas on site over television, but that's the only thing I could see. But there's no bracha of Matir Asurim. Okay, just to run, moving right along. The second shayla is an interesting one. Someone asked me that they were asked about a makeup tattoo. Makeup tattoo is basically, it's literally what it sounds like. It's a tattoo that you tattoo makeup on your face. If let's say a woman, let's say her eyebrows are a little thinner and she wants to have thicker eyebrows instead of, coloring it in every day, she literally gets a tattoo and it lasts between 1 and 3 years. So it's not as deep of the skin as a tattoo on your arm, but I definitely think it's definitely not temporary, but it's not permanent. It's 1 to 3 years. So someone asked me, she said that she has a friend who did it, and the rabbi said it's fine. So is it a problem? So obviously my visceral reaction to all tattoos is no, right? There's obviously, we've talked about this in the past, there's a misconception that people have that if you have a tattoo, you can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery. That's obviously not true. Of course you can be buried in a Jewish cemetery, that's not a thing. But like all misconceptions, it definitely comes from somewhere. Where it comes from is the Gemara tells us in Sanhedrin that they used to not bury people that were killed by the Beis Din because they had capital punishment. They were not buried with their family because Ein Kaivrin Rasha Eitzel Tzaddik. We don't bury a Rasha next to a Tzaddik. So, and by the way, it's not just a Rasha Eitzel Tzaddik. We don't bury a small Tzaddik next to a big Tzaddik. And there's two reasons given by the Rishonim of why we don't bury a Rasha next to the Tzaddik. The Sefer Chassidim says that there was a Rav who was once buried next to someone who was not a good person, and he came to the people of Shul in a dream, and he said, "Why'd you put me near a bathroom? I can't breathe. It's hard to breathe." And they realized it was that, and they exhumed the body, and the dream stopped. The other reason is, I think from the Rikanti, that he says that after a person passes away, they reveal secrets to him, secrets of Torah. And they won't do that if there's a Russian nearby. So it wasn't So the Indian is, they used to not bury Rishon next to Tzaddikim. So who had a tattoo in the 1600s? Rishon. The only people that had tattoos were, those that were Machal Shabbos. And those that became Christian went off the derech. So the Taka didn't bury someone who had a tattoo in a Jewish cemetery, but it's not because of the tattoo. It's because the tattoo was a siman, was indicative of the fact that he was Mechal Shabbos. And it was the Chil Shabbos in other areas that got to them. But it's not tattoos, dafka. But obviously tattoos are not something that Klal Yisrael does. It's like, I was once asked about a bust. It's like the head, like a statue, just the head. So is it okay to keep that? Someone Hashimenu had a bust of Marlon Brando, and I was asked, is it okay to keep this in his office? So there's a tshuva from Rav Kook. Rav Kook in Das Kohen has a tshuva about it, where he goes through and he basically talks about the Shitas Rishonim, how you're not supposed to own a statue, and what if it's not a full body, what if it's just the head, and then he goes through the whole discussion. And he concludes basically by saying that while there is room to be lenient, Klal Yisrael avoids these things. And this is not something that we should find a leniency. And I would say the exact same thing, if not more, by a tattoo. It's definitely, my visceral reaction is that it's not okay. But you got to look into it. So let me explain a little bit of what the shaila is. First of all, there were poskim who outright forbade it. Rav Vosner was not a fan, he answered it. Rav Nassan Gestetner in Laharis Nasan, Chelik Yud, Siman Samach Dalid, he answers it beferish. But the reason why I think you have to ask a shaila, first, everything I talk about, you should always ask a shaila. But this, you mamish have to ask a shaila. There's a tshuva from Rav Asher Weiss in Minchas Asher, I think it's Chelik Beis, Siman Nun Vav, I think. And he basically says like this, the basic crux of the shaila is there's 3 areas to make it a little bit better than a classic tattoo. Right? The pasuk says, it's an issa deraisa to have a tattoo. Now this is why it might be better for 3 reasons. First of all, tattoos are permanent. And the question is this considered permanent? Right? A little temporary tattoo that a kid puts a sticker on their arm, it's for sure mutter. Now this is not that, but it's also not forever. It's between 1 and 3 years. So it seems to be a debate amongst the Rishonim whether this is Asr Doraisa or Asr Derabanan. That's point number 1. Point number 2, this is a tattoo without words. According to some Rishonim, there's only an Issa Deraisa and a tattoo if there are words. There's not words, it's an eyebrow. I don't know, it's the shape of an eyebrow, it's shapes. According to some Rishonim, that's only Asr Derabanan. And lastly, the indication of many Rishonim is that the Iker prohibition of tattoos was because it was connected to idolatry. They used to, that was like a sign of idolatry. So this tattoo has nothing to do with idolatry. You're doing it for aesthetics, for beauty purposes. So it's basically like this. Most likely, this is at least Asr D'Rabbanan. It could be Asr D'Oraisa, but it's more likely a rabbinic form of a prohibition. Now, rabbinic prohibitions are still very, very severe. I will say this. Rav Asher Weiss says that he was lenient. He says that with all this, he does not want to be lenient because, as I said before, tattoos are something that there's a visceral reaction amongst Klal Yisrael. We do not err on the side of leniency when it comes to these topics. But Rav Asher Weiss did say, and Rav Vadia also seems to be along his lines, that let's say the person, this is how I would tell someone to ask a shayla. If the reason why they're getting this permanent tattoo is just because, as I read online from a lot of these fashion blogs and all these things to understand what this is, that they said basically the main purpose is so that you can wake up get out of bed, and you don't have to fix your makeup. If you're doing it just for aesthetic purposes, I don't think that it's something that would be mutter. If, however, there is a woman who has a deformity or some pigmentation issue, and she's embarrassed, like the case Rav Asher Weiss was asked, is there was a woman, I think she didn't have eyebrows, or there was some issue with her skin, and she was embarrassed to be around her husband because she wanted to look good. And it's not like, just make sure you look nice before you go to a wedding. It's all day. So Rav Asher Weiss felt that for kavod abrios, there are certain circumstances where we waive rabbinic prohibitions in order to avoid embarrassment and for honor of human dignity. And this might be that case. So I would tell someone like this. It's most likely aser. If you're dealing with a case where there's a deformity or a skin issue and you really want to avoid embarrassment, ask a shayla. Ask a Shaila. That's the Ask a Shaila, but that's the background of that Shaila. Okay, moving right along. So, I was asked by someone yesterday. His wife, Leilenu, is in Avelos, and he wanted to know. He knows that there's an issue of that you don't get a gift to someone who's in the year of mourning. He said, does that mean that he can't buy her flowers? What about her wedding? Her anniversary is coming up, her birthday. So what's the story? So I told him like this. Rabbi Olbam in Chukei Chaim has a whole chapter on this. So it's basically like this. The issue with getting someone a gift, getting someone who's in mourning a gift, is an extension of the prohibition, the issue of She'ilah Shalom. She'ilah Shalom means that we do not greet a mourner. During the year of Avelis, we don't ask him how he is. Now, that being said, it's not something that many people are particular about. The Aruch HaShulchan already talked about how it's not something that we're more lenient than we used to be. So, like the actual source of the problem, which is greeting, people are not as particular, but the getting gifts, that's like the extension of it, that they're actually more particular than the source. It's like I mentioned this. I mentioned this to someone that many Chasanim, by Chasidim, they'll wear like a kapota, they'll wear a bekisha, they'll wear a kittel, but they won't put one of their arms in the sleeve. They'll put like the sleeve like over. I don't know if you've ever seen this. And the reason for this is, so what's the pshat? So the reason for this is that there's many Hasidish minhagim regarding the chuppah that are revolving around death. Sounds strange, but there are certain minhagim under the chuppah, but especially by Hasidim, that are done in order to remind the chas and kala of death, and in order to instill awe and hopefully get them to do tshuva. Like a famous one is that they don't wear jewelry, right? Chassidim, they don't wear jewelry under the chuppah. That's why there was this fake skula that evolved, that they give friends of the chassan and kala jewelry. They say it's a skula to get married. It's not a skula to get married. HaKadosh Baruch Hu allows them to get married despite the fact they're doing a fake skula. It's not a skula. There's no source for it. The source is that there's an old Hasidish minig not to wear jewelry. Why? Because under the chuppah you're supposed to remind you of death, and you don't get buried in jewelry. It's the same reason why Hasidim also don't wear knots. They undo the tie knot and they undo the shoelaces, because we don't have tachrichim. The tachrichim, the shrouds, don't have knots. So because of this, the chas and kala don't wear jewelry in order to remind them of death, in order for them to do tshuva. So if they're not going to wear jewelry, they have to give it to the friends because they don't want it to get stolen, and that's evolved into a minhag. So because of this, in order to instill this inyan of Avelos, in the times of the Gemara, where they used to wear like robes and togas, an Avel would bare his shoulder. He would not cover his shoulder during Shiva. So because of this, many people under the chuppah will not wear the kittel on their shoulder. Now, we're not makbid about that anymore, right? Avelim don't uncover their shoulder. They don't bare their shoulder. But this is another example of like where the ikar halacha, which is bearing a shoulder, we're not particular with, but the extension of it for the chas and kala under the chuppah, that still exists. So over here, there's like the ikar thing is greeting someone, which are not as particular, but getting gifts, that people are particular. But I told them like this. First of all, for Kavod Shabbos, many poskim are lenient. So for Kavod Shabbos, many poskim are lenient that you could greet someone. So I said getting her flowers for Shabbos is for sure fine. Secondly, if it's something that you did last year, meaning before the Avelis, you got her a birthday gift, you got her an anniversary gift, you should do the same. You shouldn't do less. And then just in general, if she, especially by a wife, where if she's going through a hard time and you think getting her a gift will boost her morale and help enhance shalom bayis, you definitely could be lenient, because there were poskim, Rabbi Olm quotes this in the footnotes, in Chukei Chaim, there were poskim who felt that the whole issue of getting gifts is an extension of Shila Shalom, is an extension of greeting a wife. That's not what Chazal forbade. Chazal, when they said don't greet an avel, they weren't referring to a husband and wife. They were referring to outside people. A husband and wife, the whole thing doesn't really apply so much. Therefore, while we are particular, if you need to get her a gift, you definitely can. Okay, moving right along. So, 3 more topics. One is tevilas kalim. We know that you have to dip in the mikveh, min HaTorah, you have to dip metal. Rabbinically, you have to dip glass. So I was asked about. So the question I was asked is about china or porcelain. Does it require tevilas kalim? So basically, like this: in the beginning of Yeridea Simin Kuf Chav, the Shulchan Aruch writes that we know that glass and metal require tefillah. Earthenware, which is like the pottery, like that you spin on the pottery wheel, does not require tefillah. What happens if you have earthenware? If you have earthenware that's coated in metal, so the inside does not require, but it's coated in material that requires. The Shulchan Aruch writes you have to be toivel it in the mikveh, even with a bracha. So porcelain is earthenware, and china. Porcelain are earthenware and china. Porcelain and china are earthenware that is glazed with a thin layer of glass. So l'chayra, it requires tefillah. And that's how we paskin. Now the question is, do you make a bracha? I would not. We do not make a bracha for two reasons. First of all, there were some shitas, not like the shach, but there were some shitas, the pritoyar, amongst others, quoted in the Darkei Tshuva. There were some paiskim that hold that while earthenware coated in metal requires tefillah because the coating requires, earthenware coated in glass maybe not. That's debatable. In addition, Ramosha Feinstein has a tshuva where he talks about something unrelated, not 100% by tefillas kalim, but he says that our earthenware, our porcelain in China, it's a very thin layer of glass, so maybe that thin layer of glass is insignificant. So while we don't rely on those opinions to exempt it from tefillah, we do it without a bracha. So that's porcelain in China requires tevilas kalim without a bracha. Now, what about Teflon? A Teflon coated frying pan. Now, Teflon is interesting. That's, you see, till now we talked about a case where you have porcelain, which is the inside is exempt from tevilas kalim, but the outside requires. What about the opposite? What if you have a frying pan which is metal, which requires, but it's coated in Teflon? Teflon is plastic. So the coating exempts. So the Paiskim say it's unclear what the halacha is in such a scenario because they never had that. The Paiskim, the Shulchan Aruch only discussed the opposite, where the coating required. Here the coating exempts. So what do you do when you're not sure? You toivel it without a bracha. That's the halacha for Teflon as well. Okay, the last two shilas I wanted to talk about is drinking water before Havdalah. We know that generally once, especially when it comes to Shabbos, once there's sort of a change, once you, let's say in the beginning of Shabbos, Friday night, once it's sunset, the beginning of Shabbos, or once a woman lights candles, she really can't eat or drink anymore. And a man, once it's sunset, you're Mekabel Shabbos, you can't eat or drink anymore. And definitely once it's sunset, you can't drink even water. That's the halacha, because you need to hear Kiddush. Shabbos morning, the chiv of Kiddush begins once you finish Shachris. So once you finish Shachris, Shmoneh Esrei Shachris, you can't drink water anymore. A lot of times people will bring into shul, they'll bring like a bottle of water, a cup of coffee, and they'll be sipping it throughout davening. Once Shachris is over, you need to hear Kiddush. So too it is by the end of Shabbos. The halacha is once sunset comes, Shkia, towards the end of Shabbos, you can't eat or drink anymore. Now, if you washed and you're middle of Shal Shuddis, you can continue eating your meal. But if you didn't wash for Shal Shuddis, once it's sunset, you got to stop snacking. You got to stop eating or drinking. So let's say you didn't wash for Shal Shuddis, or even if you didn't, you benched. So that means you can't eat or drink anything until you hear Havdalah. The halacha is, though, that before Havdalah, while you're not allowed to eat or drink anything, and even so you're not allowed to eat or drink anything, but the Ramah says you're allowed to drink water. You're allowed to drink water before Havdalah. Now, this sounds a little shocking to people, and the reason why it's a little shocking is because the Arizal disagreed. But let's go with the halacha, and then I'll mention the Arizal. The halacha is, from the Ramah, you're allowed to drink water and water only. So Rav Heinemann Shlita, in the new sefer that came out last year called Manadaber, Rav Heinemann said as follows. He said, Gam mutalishtes teh coffee, you're allowed to drink tea, coffee, seltzer, even flavored seltzer, as long as there's no sugar. As long as there's no sugar, it's considered water. So according to Rav Heinemann, you could drink water, tea, coffee, and even seltzer, and even flavored seltzer if there's no sugar, before Havdalah. Now, that would mean, they'll say a woman is waiting for Havdalah, she could drink those things. However, the Arizal felt that Al Pi Kabbalah, you shouldn't drink anything, including water. So, it's not a great thing to do, because the Arizal was very much against it. So for practical halacha, it is not advisable to be lenient because you're going against the Arizon, going against Kabbalah. However, if one finds himself very thirsty and they can't make Havdalah, they could drink water before Havdalah. It's not the end of the world to drink water or seltzer or sugar, tea and coffee without sugar. That you have what to rely on. Again, it's not the Shita the Arizal, but according to the Ramah, it's technically mutter. Rav Avad Yosef has a tshuva where he talked about how Yom Kippur, once Ne'ilah is over, right, and they blew shofar, so Yom Tov is over, you can't eat or drink anything until Havdalah. So you daven Ma'ariv first. The problem is a lot of times people have a headache and they don't feel well during Ma'ariv. So he says, let them drink water against the Arizal, but according to Halach, it's permitted, and that way they'll be able to daven Ma'ariv as a mensch. Now, I don't know if that's something I would do, but it's just good to know that technically water is permissible, api halacha, but not api Kabbalah. Okay, the last discussion is the laws of Zimun. The laws of Zimun is that when 3 people eat together, they have to do a Zimun. When 10 people eat together, they have to have a Zimun b'Shem Hashem. Now, there are differences between Ashkenazim and Sfardim. There are some differences. I'll mention one of them now. So, what most people do is not 100% correct, and that is what most people do is the person who's leaving the Zimun will say Rabbi Sana Barech. They'll all respond to Hishem Hashem Baruch Me'atav Adolam. They'll say Hishem Baruch Shacham Mishalai, and they say Baruch Shacham Mishalai Tvachayinu. Boom. And then usually what happens is the person who leads benching goes quiet, and he just davens amongst himself. Now the Sfardim are okay with that. They feel that Zimun stops with that. You've already said Zimun, done. Ashkenazim disagree. According to the Ashkenazi Psak, you have to say the first bracha, Hazana Selam Koloi B'Tavai, has to be said out loud by the person leading benching. And if you say it quietly, meaning if people who hear the benching do not hear the first bracha being said out loud, it's shaloi kedin, it's against halacha. The person who leads benching has to say the first bracha out loud. When I was in yeshiva, when they would lead benching, everyone would shh, and the person who led benching would say it out loud. You have to say the first bracha out loud. Ad kedei kach, again for Ashkenazim, ad kedei kach, that there's a machlokes mishabru and Chazon Ish in the following situation. Let's say you find yourself at a bar mitzvah. So you have a zimun of 10 people, because you get to say Shem Hashem, and they're having one giant zimun. The problem is you're so far away, you barely can hear the guy. And if you hear the guy, you're definitely not going to hear him say the first bracha. According to the Mishnah Berurah, it's better for people to split up, do zimuns of 3 without the name of Hashem, at least so they can hear the first bracha being said, as opposed to doing the zimun incorrectly. That's how far the Mishnah Berurah says. It's better to split up and not have 10 in order to at least say the first bracha out loud. The Chazon Ish disagrees because he feels that when there's 10 people, we follow the Sfardi approach, which is the Iker Zimun is not the first bracha, it's the hearing Shem Hashem. But you see this, that when a person leads Zimun, the first bracha should be said out loud according to Ashkenazi Psak. But now I want to talk about what do you have to do? How many people have to eat in order for Zimun to be said? So it's like this. If let's say you find yourself in a place where they're saying Zimun, and you didn't eat at all, you did nothing. So the halacha is, you don't answer what they answer, there's a different nusach. The nusach is that if a person, they say, you say, Yishem Hashem Baruch Me'atav Yishem Hashem Baruch Shacham Mishaloi, you say, instead of that, you don't say Baruch Shacham Mishaloi, you say Baruch Baruch Shemoi Tamid Lo'olam Vad. It's a different nusach. You should memorize this because a lot of times people don't realize it. You say Baruch Baruch Shemoi Tamid Lo'olam Vad, or Baruch Elikein Baruch Shemoi Tamid Lo'olam Vad. That is the nusach that is said when you are in an area and you did not eat with them. Okay. Now let's say you ate with them. What do you have to eat in order to have a zimun? So when it's 3 people, lichatchila, all 3 should have bread. Let's say 2 had breads. The halacha is, a lot of people don't realize this, if 2 people had bread and the third person had mezainis, or had vegetables, or had a protein, had any bracha other than water, even a shahakal, let's say they drink a chosh of a drink, they drink a tea or coffee, whatever it is, soup, you could answer zimun. You could do 3, as long as you have 2 people leading, two people who ate bread, if the third person had a mezainis or shahakal, anything other than water, you could have a zimun. Sfardim prefer mezainis. Ashkenazim are okay with vegetables, but the point is, b'diavad, as long as the third person ate something, you could have a zimun of 3. Now that's a zimun for 3. What about a zimun of 10? So the halach is by a zimun of 10, all you need is 7 people to wash on bread. The other 3, as long as they ate something, it could be a mezainis, it could be a shakal, a hadam, a ha'etz. As long as the other 3 people ate something, you could have a zimun with a Shem Hashem. Now, unlike davening where you need 6 people who didn't daven, over here you need 7. You need 7 people to have wash because you need what's called a ruba de minkar. That's one distinction. That's another halacha that a lot of people are not aware of. And regarding women, the halacha is like this: if the women ate with men, they need to answer zimun. Right? A lot of times you'll have it where the women ate with men, a Shabbos table. They're required to answer zimun because they ate at a meal that had zimun, a requirement of zimun. Then they have to answer. A lot of times you have it where let's say they won't call the women; they have to answer. Now, if there are no men, now whether women could do a zimun on their own, minig of Ashkenazim is some Sfardim do it. Minig of Ashkenazim, it's much more of a modern Orthodox. It's much more of a. It's not generally done. But if there are men present and the men require a zimun and they're making zimun, the women should definitely answer.